So first of all, good job coming this evening. I don't know how many of you read the description of this talk, but it's about death and grieving, and simply the fact that you're here at all, given that description, is an indication of your heroism. So give yourself some appreciation. Give yourself some congratulations for being the sort of person who would come to an event like this. As far as I can tell, given the investigations that I have surrendered to over the past few decades, various studies, primarily those in monasteries, the basic problem on Earth is that human beings don't want to die. That's a basic problem on the planet. We don't want to die in a number of different ways, and because of those avoidance mechanisms, we're creating a situation in which everyone is going to be killed. So we're, in trying to solve a certain problem, that of our own death, we're creating a much, much larger problem, that being the death of every living thing on the planet. So you are solving that problem. Just by being here, just by dealing with this, just by working with the fact of the end of life in its various forms. You're doing exactly the thing that resolves this problem, and so you deserve congratulations and appreciation for your heroism. Well, as they say, this is the second hardest thing to do in the whole world, what you're doing here this evening. Yes? What's the hardest thing? Not doing it. The hardest thing of all is to not be willing to grieve death. The second hardest thing is to grieve death. So it can seem when we hear about, okay, I'm going to come to a place and grieve, face the reality of the end of life, and deal with the emotions that come with that, that's going to be really hard. I've already had a long week. I don't know if I'm up for that. It'll be exhausting and depressing. And it may be exhausting and depressing, but there's something that is more exhausting and more depressing than this. And it is not this. Everything else. So it seems when we're trying to face something like death, that that's very tiring. It's hard. But if we pay attention, if we can actually pay attention to the experience of doing that, and if we can pay attention to the experience of not doing that, we find that it actually takes more effort to not do that. So moment by moment, we have to constantly attempt to not face death, because death is clear. Here it is. It's not unclear. No one is, you could say, hiding it from you. Yes? People don't tell you good news, you're going to live forever. In fact, a lot of people tell you bad news, you're not going to live forever. And so to constantly attempt to avoid that fact, to not experience the reality of our passing, this takes constant effort. And that is exhausting. And so when we feel exhausted at the end of the week, you know, in general, the reason that we're so tired is that we've been spending most of our energy not facing the end of our lives, not looking at that. And it takes work. It takes constant effort to attempt to not know that we are dying, that we're going to die, that everyone we love is going to die. And those efforts to avoid that change how we live. They change how we interact with the world. So you're here doing something hard and you deserve congratulations, but you're not doing something as hard as what the people are doing who didn't come this evening. So congratulations for doing this hard thing, and congratulations for making this evening easier on yourself. It's good. This kind of ease, this kind of relaxation is a healthy form. So the first, I'd like to talk about the end of life at 3 different levels. The first is the simple fact that each of us is going to die, that all of the things that we have learned will be lost, the information that we've gathered will be forgotten when this brain falls apart. The relationships will dissolve. The people who we love and depend on will go away. The connections we have that allow us to bolster our sense of who we are will fall off. We often form relationships that give us a sense of who we are. In fact, most of our identity is in our relationships. Most people don't notice that, but if you lose a relationship, if you're in a very close relationship, and then you lose that relationship, it's very common that you actually feel like part of yourself has died. And the reason it feels that way is that it's true. Part of yourself has died. That person holds a part of your identity. We have the sense that my identity is somehow inside of me, but most of our identity is a contract, and we agree to look at each other in certain ways, and then everybody can have a sense of, this is who I am, and if you see me this way and I also see me this way, then I must be that way. And so we have a sense of stability. But those relationships fall away. And beyond that, the remainder of our identity, the constant delusion that we have about who we are, that at the end of our lives isn't maintained anymore. That can't be maintained anymore. This is very hard for us to face. It's hard for us to face even that we are maintaining a constant sense of delusion about who we are. Even that we continually refabricate a story about our identity, about how we live. There was a certain person who I was talking to who is... So I like to say that there's a definition of yourself. There's a very convenient way to define oneself. And that is that if you take the whole universe, then you could divide the universe up into different parts, right? You could divide the whole universe up into, say, all the parts that are air, and then all the parts that aren't air. Does that make sense? That's one way you could divide the universe up. Does this make sense? Does this make sense, Paul? You're a grounded person here. I'm asking you. Okay, good. So, you can divide the universe up into these various sections. All the parts of the universe that are red, all the parts of the universe that are not red. Yes? You can divide the universe up in different ways. So one way to divide up is to say, the part of the universe about which you are most deluded, to the sections of the universe about which you are most confused, and then the rest of the universe, right? So we have a word for the part of the universe about which you're most delusional. That is yourself. Okay, so if you collect all the parts of the universe about which you're most ignorant and just put them into one basket, the label on the basket is myself. So we uphold constantly this delusion, and it's hard. It's very difficult to do that. It's tiring to constantly hold on to this delusional sense of who I am, which is why so often we have the impression, we have the subjective experience, that it's a sort of me against the world. It's as if I'm in a battle with the whole universe and I'm losing somehow. Well, the reason is that the rest of the universe doesn't believe in these delusions. The rest of the universe isn't living their lives according to these delusions. You're the only one who's living your life. And so, of course, you're living in a way that doesn't flow with the rest of the world. And it feels, but it's justifiable. Because this is the truth. It isn't. It's delusional. But it feels as if it's the truth because it's delusion. And so, when the rest of the universe fails to abide by those delusions, it feels as if we're in a battle. As if we're fighting against the world. Well, here's the good news, which is experienced as the worst news. When you die, you can't maintain that delusion anymore. The thing that falls apart is the basket. And then all of the ability to ignore who we really are and what we have really done is lost. This is an experience of total vulnerability. The things that you've used to protect yourself from the truth that you are, and you can analyze that sentence closely. I hope you do. It's worth looking at how many internal contradictions there are in those few words. The things you've used to avoid the truth that you are. It's very confusing. Who is avoiding what, where, how? It's worth looking at this, but those things that you have used to avoid the truth that you are, the things that you've done, that dies. That falls off. You don't have the ability anymore to avoid this truth. And this actually starts to happen even before you physically die. There was a Harada Roshi, the main teacher who I trained under, who ordained me, in Japan. He has a hospice near one of the training centers that he's established. And someone was there and was dying, and he only had about a week to live. It turned out to be 5 days. And while he was lying in bed dying, facing this, only occasionally visited by his family, because that's so commonly the case in our society, he watched a video about Harada Roshi, in which Harada Roshi talked about his own spiritual path and the insights that had afforded him. And the man watched the video and then said, what that man, meaning Harada Roshi, what that man is saying is the truth. It's not his opinion. And that means that I have wasted my life. I have completely wasted my life, and it's too late. And he, in that state of horrible suffering, died a few days later. The reason that there's grieving when we come to a place like this and talk about things like this is that it's time for us to face that, we have wasted our lives, that we've lived our lives according to our opinions rather than according to the truth. And that is tragic. It's horrifying. And we should experience that horror. It's better. I know it seems worse. I know it's the last thing any of us want to experience. The best thing for us to experience is the last thing we want to experience. The thing we want to avoid most is the best thing for us. Namely, that we have wasted our lives and therefore have to completely change the way we're living. We would rather do anything. In fact, many of us would rather die than do this. But it's the source of the deepest happiness. So we come to a place like this in order to try to become a little bit more capable of experiencing that level of grief, that level of horror. Because any happiness you experience that isn't the result of that isn't actually happiness. As I like to say, any dance you dance that isn't, that you can't, any dance that you dance without having gone through that isn't a dance of joy. It's a fake dance. You're faking your dance. It's not real. The dance that we have has to be able to be danced in accordance with that grief. If it can only be danced when avoiding that grief, it's not an actual dance. It's just an avoidance mechanism. It's a trick. And this path is not a trick. This path is what happens when we don't make a trick. We want to have this sort of happiness. We want to have some kind of happiness that doesn't require us to go through that. But the issue is we have to go through it. You're going to die. You're going to go through it. You know that. And so if you find a happiness that doesn't move in harmony with going through that, then you're just looking for a shortcut. And most people enter the spiritual path looking for a shortcut. That's actually what most of us do. I was just talking to one of the community members in this group yesterday, and he said that most people enter the path looking for magic. They hope, oh, it's going to be great, I'm going to do a little meditation, and it's going to be a shortcut, and I won't have to face the things that I have to face. I won't have to change the things I have to change. This path is going to be a really good shortcut. But in fact, you enter the path when you stop looking for a shortcut. That's the definition of the path. The path is the thing that happens when you don't look for a shortcut. When you're looking for shortcuts, you're not on the path. But most spiritual teachers nowadays, especially in this country, are just offering a shortcut. When they say, good news, here's a spiritual path, you're going to get enlightened in a week if you come to my course, and then you're going to be somebody who's always right and is always happy and can lord your perfect identity over others. They say that, but they know perfectly well that it's because that consumers in our society are shopping for a shortcut. There was another one of someone else in our community was telling me about a real spiritual teacher who she was training under in India, and he was talking about the importance of ethics and virtue. You have to gradually come to the point when you can live a compassionate life. It's hard, it's a struggle, and another American raised her hand and said, okay, I understand how important all this is, but isn't there a shortcut? Isn't there a faster way? And she said he was just sort of confused, and he said, but this is the shortcut. Aeons of struggle is the shortcut. That's the shortcut. To completely change everything is the shortcut. You understand? If you don't completely change everything, well, that's a long path. So we come here in order to find the shortcut, in order to find out why it is that constant work, facing the reality of death, is the shortcut. And one very important part of that is facing the significance of the process of death. I should say, most of us nowadays at least attempt to be materialists. Most of us have been trained to be materialists. We entered, as I like to say, seminary. We entered the indoctrination procedure at the age of 5. And we're taught materialism by the state-sponsored religion when we entered that seminary, which is to say education. The educational institution teaches us materialism, and which people call science a lot of the time. But scientific materialism is very common, and how could we not buy into it to a certain extent? Most of us try to live that way, but we find, especially people who work with people who are dying, who are coming to the end of their life, a very similar experience to what I just reported, which is that people come to the end of their life having lived a life based on materialism and therefore hedonism, a sense that there isn't anything that goes beyond death, and they come to the end. They come to the very end. They have a few days left, say. Their family, who also believes that that's it, is gone because they have to go shopping or they have a big project at work or something, and so this time of life, the last few days of someone's life, is not important enough to take time off of work, say. And so there you are alone, paying for the expensive care with all the money you saved up from when you were working rather than taking care of your parents. And they suddenly realize, it's very common that a person suddenly realizes, oh, I never actually believed that. I never really believed that I'm just matter, that I'm just physical stuff, that it just ends. I said that, I even said it to myself, and it's embarrassing, it's shameful now to admit that I was wrong. But I never really bought that story. And now I've lived a whole life not preparing for this moment when I'm going to die and continue on to some other experience, some other existence. And I am in no way prepared for this most important of all journeys. I mean, I gave up the ability to prepare for this because I was doing a project at work. And it wasn't worth it. That was a poor choice. And I made that choice thousands of times, and now I'm here. And that was really, really bad. And then we died in that state of mind. This is very common. And in fact, if we look at Buddhism, if we look at modern spirituality, we see, in this culture anyway, we see that view, that way of seeing, has more or less won, more or less taken over the Buddhist and most spiritual traditions, teachings, such that we now think of, of this practice being non-judgmental awareness of the present moment, which means don't worry about death, and that we have no position on whether there's anything other than physical stuff, or whether there's rebirth, or anything like. We don't worry about that. If that's, we're gonna, what is it? It's not on the table. Is that a term? What is it? Something can be on the table. Is that what it is? What is it?
Cards.
What?
On the cards.
In the cards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it's not in the cards.
It's off the table.
Off the table. It's off the table. It's under the table. Right? So, I don't know. So we have this this sense that we're not gonna talk about that. It's too touchy. You've already been indoctrinated since the age of 5. I don't want to, trigger you emotionally because it's a big deal. So we're gonna offer you a product that doesn't make you uncomfortable. I was very fortunate because another member of this community at one point, we were driving together, actually driving to here. We parked right there, outside of this building. And he comes from a different tradition, basically Christian tradition. And he was telling me, in a very kind way actually, that he had no interest in Buddhism. He looked at Buddhism and he had no interest in it because it doesn't talk about anything important. So that was a surprise to me. So I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, it doesn't talk about who we really are. It doesn't talk about what happens after you die. It doesn't talk about any of the most important things in life, so it's worthless. I don't know that he used the word worthless, but I felt that he was using the word worthless, and I had no reply. He's right. I had no answer. It is correct what he was saying. That Buddhism as it's taught now is basically worthless. Now, that doesn't mean that the choices that people made, such as John Kabat-Zinn, who is a friend of mine who I very much like and respect, who made up the non-judgmental awareness of the present moment teaching. It's fantastic. I see what he was doing and I think it's wonderful. But he's been clear with me that he expects people like me and you to take it beyond that, that that's what our culture could handle and it's time to move on. We have to continue to go beyond that. What does that mean? Well, that's up to us. It's not up to him. He did his part. We have to step up and be adults now. So one of the most important things to look at is the clear teaching in countless traditions that there is a continuation, that we do continue on, that there's something that continues on somehow, that death isn't the end. And in facing that, in truly looking at this fact that there's something that continues on, we finally come to have what in Buddhism is called right view. And right view is a lot, but right view can be summarized with 2 points. One is you can't avoid the consequences of what you have done. You cannot avoid the consequences of what you have done. You can't do it. That requires this sense of rebirth continuing on after you pass away. You cannot avoid it. In other words, you can't externalize harm. That's our modern way of putting it. You cannot externalize harm. So externalize is a term that I'm very familiar with because of my training in economics. If there's a company that creates pollution but sells a product and they don't have to worry, they can just pollute and they harm a lot of people, but they sell the product and they get 100% of the money, then they have externalized the harm. So all the people who are hurt are paying a price for these few people to get the product, and all that money goes back to the company. This is an externality. You externalize harm. There are also positive externalities, but the other side of this, of course the most important one, is to see that you can't externalize harm. You can't create harm and not experience it. You cannot do that. It's not just that you sort of shouldn't do that, it's that you actually can't do that. You cannot do that. You cannot externalize harm. You can't say, well, I didn't think it through carefully enough. You can't say that. Well, tough. It's just tough luck. You can't, it's like you're driving a car, you drive a car into a wall, you can't say, well, I didn't think it through carefully enough, so it doesn't count. It counts. You can't, there's no one to complain to. It just is how it is. The same way, if you hurt someone, that pain has to come back to you. It's just how it is. You cannot avoid it. It's not that you shouldn't, although you shouldn't, but the reason you shouldn't is that you can't. So that's the first point. The second point is that there is such a thing as an escape. There is such a thing as an escape from this. There is spiritual awakening. Now these seem totally contradictory, and so we walk the path in order to understand them, how they are not contradictory. Of course, there are also positive externalities. You can do good things. Well, that happiness must come back to you. You cannot avoid it. It's impossible to avoid the happiness that you create for others. You must experience it. You can try to avoid it. You won't succeed. Maybe in this lifetime, maybe in the next lifetime, maybe in a subsequent lifetime, you must experience that happiness or that harm. And furthermore, there's an escape from this whole round of happiness and sadness and rise and fall. So we have to see that. We see that there is rebirth, there is something that continues on, there are consequences. And what happens for most people when we finally see this is that the underlying philosophical basis of the destruction of life on earth ends. This is very confusing and subtle for most of us. But for most of us, the underlying philosophical assumption that allows us to be complicit or participatory in this economic and financial system that is destroying life on the planet, that is ending life on the planet at an exponential rate for 10,000 years now, the thing that allows us, the primary thing that allows us to participate in that is that we think, well, we're just physical stuff. I'm just going to die anyway. And besides, all those trees and animals and the earth itself, that's just physical matter. It doesn't make any difference. There's nobody there. It's all just physical stuff. It's just resources. That's all I am. That's all you are. We're just physical stuff. It doesn't actually matter. And because we've dulled our sense of what matters with this philosophical, faith-based view that everything's just physical, because of that, we can participate. We can continue to participate in an unjust system of utter, heartless destruction. Because we have convinced ourselves that, in fact, the truth is we are heartless. In truth, I am heartless. I am just physical matter. And you are just physical matter. And everything is just physical matter. So it doesn't make any difference. When we start digging down, the place where this breaks is the acceptance that when this physical matter falls apart, this stuff, something continues on. Somehow, this life, in some very mysterious way, continues on, and there continue to be the experiences of the consequences of our actions. When we have that experience, a completely new kind of love emerges. For the first time, we can experience a level of love for all life that we have intentionally, you can't get out of it, dulled. oppressed, prevented. And that wells up in us, and we have the direct experience of feeling love for all living things. We directly know our connection with all living things. We directly know the bliss of a love, of a joy that fills the entire universe, that actually fills the entire universe. We actually experience it. Most of us, when we experience love, it's sort of a feeling maybe in our chest area. This love is not like that. This is love that you can directly feel throughout the entire universe. This is a life-changing experience, and you can't go back. You can't go back to being less happy than you are once you've had that experience. Before you have that experience, you're this happy. After you've had the experience, you're this happy, and you cannot go back. It's not possible to go back because you can't deny that experience. There's no way to explain it away. And you'll probably try. You'll probably attempt to explain it away. It's not real. I'm sure it's not real. It must not be real. I just have to figure out why it's not real. Oh boy. And then you get to work on that. But eventually you see what I was saying earlier, that to believe it's not real is just more work. It gets tiring to keep on figuring out why you can explain that it's not real. So eventually you're just tired. You had a hard day at work or something. So you just give up and say, okay, fine, it's real. Okay, I'll be happy. Fine. If you, whoever you are, insist. If everything insists. I guess I'll be happy for now. Till I figure out why it's not true. So we have that experience, and when we have that experience, this love informs something, a completely new relationship with life. And at that time, we start to experience the degree of the horror. It's that joy, that happiness that allows us to experience the degree of the horror of what we human beings are doing right now on this planet. Destroying life. Actually destroying life. Actually destroying life. And I mean, here's the deal. If you walk this path, especially with somebody like me, the path goes like this. You just have to face again and again that the problem is much, much bigger than you thought it was. That's the deal. That's what it's like. I'm predicting the future for you. If you keep going, you will again and again realize, oh, the problem is much bigger than I thought it was. The good news is you also experience something else, which is, oh, love, happiness, joy, is much realer than I thought it was. I thought that was just fake and we're all just physical, but it turns out that that's actually real, a little anyway. In some way, it might be real. And then you realize, oh, but the problem is really big. And then you realize, oh, but wait, this might be real. Oh, no, this is terrible. Oh, yes, oh, no, oh, yes, oh, no. And that's the step along the path. So we come to see with this arising of love and an awareness that we are not just a physical form, that is totally unacceptable. That we can't do it. We cannot kill everybody. And amazing, you say, we can't kill everyone. And you say it to people, and they just nod and say, yeah, right. And you can see, oh, you haven't gone through this grieving process yet. And no matter what I say to you, it doesn't matter. You're not going to hear those simple words because you're just unable to grieve since you haven't felt this love, since you haven't grieved, since you haven't loved, since you haven't grieved, since you haven't loved. And it goes down and down and down, deeper and deeper, so that we realize, in any case, I have to do this. That's what I can do. I can do this. I can go through this process, which is why having you here now is heroic. It's heroic that we are doing this. We are going down and down and down through the grief-love process. The grieving, the rejoicing, the horror, the wonder of the path. As we do that, we our love for all beings becomes an act, but a helpless act. It is an act that we take, but we're not capable of not taking it. But we still actively take it. but we couldn't not take it. It's an act. We are totally engaged, and we actively love, actively engage the sense of love, but we couldn't not do it. As that happens, we see how big, we again and again see how big the problem is, until we see that we have to completely stop creating this problem. We have to completely stop living a life based on me versus you. We have to completely stop living a life of greed, of hatred, of ignorance. We have to completely stop this sense that there's an inside and an outside, and that this basket of delusion has to fight against everything for its survival, and somehow it's worth it, and everything is wrong. We realize we have to completely stop that. To completely stop that is actually the end of life. That's enlightenment. To completely stop that is spiritual death, is the spiritual end of life experience, which is the thing that all of us are fighting against with all of our power all the time. Enlightenment is what happens when you stop doing everything in your power to not experience enlightenment. Enlightenment is a completely natural experience that can't not happen unless you stop it from happening. It doesn't have to be made to happen. It's not some magical thing. It's just the automatic, it just doesn't not happen. Because you've stopped making sure that it doesn't happen. We don't want to die spiritually. We don't want to give up our sense of self. Whatever that sense of self is, that sense of self could be I exist, which is what a lot of us subconsciously believe. It could be I don't exist, which is what a lot of us subconsciously believe. Both of these are a sense of self. They're both delusional. There's a direct realization that goes beyond existence and non-existence, and that realization is what I would call spiritual death. You find the root of your life, and you cut it. That then is liberation, is freedom. And with that comes not only the ability to not participate in this, but the wisdom that allows us to learn how to live without participating in it. That's an actual wisdom. We have to realize that wisdom. It isn't enough to just want it. We have to realize the wisdom that allows us to actually do it. That's a wisdom. It's something that is actually realized. It's an actual thing that we actually realize. Is that people don't understand. I think I'm going to sit and now I feel peaceful, and that's the point. It's great that you feel peaceful. You have to take that to the point where you actually realize wisdom. Wisdom is a thing. It's an actual thing that we actually realize so that we know how to live differently. We know how to live without participating in these structures of injustice. And beyond that, we've already found the love, the happiness, the bliss, the joy that fulfills us so that we don't need the structures of injustice to find the happiness that we need in order to be healthy. Instead of that, we directly realize wisdom, and then the actual work can finally begin. This is the true end of life. This, don't think that one isn't horrifying. That one's horrifying also. But we start with the little horror, that I'm going to die. That's already overwhelming. Most of us spend our lives avoiding that. Well, you got to face it. What does that mean, actually? Face it. Don't wait. Then you realize, oh no, that we're trying to avoid dying is causing everyone to die. Every living thing is you all know about the environmental crisis, right? I'm looking out at the crowd. I'm not seeing a lot of nodding. Okay, it's very serious. It's not a joke. It's very serious. It's the most serious thing that has ever happened. It's the worst thing that's ever happened. And we here are complicit, participatory in this happening. We are making that happen because we're not willing to face our own death. Not willing to face the reality, the consequences, the significance of our death. If we face that, then the next thing is to face the reality of the destruction of life on Earth. When we face that completely, then we find left with the ultimate death. That being complete spiritual death. Complete and absolute spiritual death. Even the death of death. Because if life dies, if we die, then our death dies too. Even death dies. Life dies, birth dies, I die, but the world dies. Death dies. And there's complete freedom. This, if it's realized, gives us the wisdom to know how to no longer avoid our own death, and therefore to live in a way that's in accord with all living things. This is the significance of the training. So, please give yourself some respect, some appreciation for being willing to go through this process. This is the great adventure. This is the great journey. And it's tough. It's real. This is real. It's the real thing now. If you're doing this, then you're doing the real thing. And that can be frightening, of course, but know that the happiness that comes from it is also real. It is really real. And it's worth the price. It's worth the struggle. As Peace Pilgrim said, when we're walking the path, it seems very hard. But once we've realized the fruit of the path, we look back and we ask, how could something so wonderful come so easily? How could this be so easy? We look back and it doesn't make sense. We just suffered and struggled for a few decades. We just suffered and struggled for a few decades. And we get this supreme reward. It feels actually unfair. It feels inappropriate. It doesn't seem right that we should get that much happiness for that little struggle. And yet somehow it's true. It's miraculous. It doesn't make sense. There's no way to justify it. You can't explain it. It's not fair. You know, you look at your experience and you realize it's not fair. I don't deserve this amount of joy. But good news, you don't need to. You're not the point. It's not about you. The joy doesn't really care about you too much. The joy just emerges out of nothing for no reason to no end. So this, this realization is the point of the path. May we directly experience it so that the wisdom that emerges from it can save the world. Take a moment to settle into your body. Feel your body. Feel your breath. Feel your emotions and other sensations that are moving through your body right now. The challenge for this part of the exercise is to stay with whatever sensations arise. They may be pleasant, they may be unpleasant, they may be neutral. And the challenge is to stay with each body sensation as it arises, and then to let it pass away as it passes away. The most common method of avoiding body sensations that people use, the typical human approach to avoiding the experience of having a body, is to escape into our minds, to think about things. If you notice that you've started to avoid your body by drifting off into your mind, then without worrying about that, without making a big deal about that, simply return to body sensations. And return to your body with a little bit of curiosity. What body sensation were you trying to get away from? Which body sensation was it? Of course, that may be a painful body sensation, an unpleasant one. But for many of us, it's a pleasant, a joyful body sensation that we're trying to avoid. That's quite normal. So don't be surprised if the simple joy of being alive is what you're trying to avoid by going into a mind of worry, anxiety, depression, loneliness, or other stuck mental states. It's okay to experience the simple joy of being alive. Try it out. Just try it out. It might not be so bad. And of course, the negative, the difficult sensations of pain or other uncomfortable body sensations also may not be that bad if we stay with them. So for now in the exercise, simply stay with the body sensations of this moment. Once again, the exercise is to stay with body sensations. If you find yourself caught in thoughts, having left your experience of your body, then gently, kindly return to body sensations and with some curiosity. Was there some body sensation that I was avoiding, that I was trying to get away from by entering the realm of thought? By leaving my body and entering my mind? Was there something pleasant or unpleasant that I was trying to escape from? And then simply pay attention to your body with this investigation at the forefront, not pushing it, but the gentle curiosity, fascination, examining and discovering. And as you pay attention to these body sensations, notice that each of them, whether pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, notice that all of them pass away. Some last less than a second, some last much longer, but all of them pass away. Notice that characteristic of feelings, of sensations. They pass away. What you're feeling changes. It's gone. And once it's gone forever. You can't ever get it back. That part of you died. It's not recoverable. You are completely helpless to this. You have no power. It's gone. Notice that. Each sensation, you experience it, and then it passes away. Notice that directly. We can hear these words, but it's very different to experience it. And as you pay attention to the passing away of these sensations, in particular, pay attention to the passing away of each breath. Each breath passes away. Each breath arises and then is gone. That breath came and went. It will not come again. It's gone. That breath, that one of the many breaths that you'll take in this life, that breath is now gone. Experience that. Simply experience that. If we think about this, it's not the same thing as experiencing it. In the same way that thinking about eating isn't the same thing as eating. If you're hungry and you need nourishment, thinking about eating will not nourish your body. You have to actually eat. And even if the food that you eat is exactly the same food that you are thinking about eating, the impact on your body is very different. Directly experience the passing of each breath. It's not recoverable. You can't get it back. You can't take it again. You don't get a second chance. And notice with each breath that it was insufficient. Meaning that that breath wasn't enough to keep you alive. You now have to take another breath. Take that breath and then notice this breath also is inadequate, is insufficient. It also passes away. And then consider that there will be a time when all of those breaths together are inadequate and you will not inhale again. Consider this, again, experientially. A lot of us have a very clear sense of the sort of experience we want to have when we acknowledge this. Many of us want to feel, oh, it's okay, it's going to be great, I'm going to be free, I'm going to be beyond everything. Others of us want to feel, oh no, it's scary, it's going to be awful. These are all ways of avoiding the practice that we're doing right now. We're still stuck in our heads rather than directly experiencing the passing, the impermanent, the hollow nature of our bodies, and in particular for now of our breath. Explore that directly. Each breath is inadequate. At a certain point, the breaths will cease, and then this body will rot and decompose, be cast off and lost. We can understand this conceptually. We can also understand it directly by exploring this breath as it arises and passes away. And that way we can understand the nature of our bodies. If we experience this completely, then we know for ourselves that there is a continuing on. And we know for ourselves an escape from that. Simply a matter of experiencing this completely. We experience this completely. We experience the supreme horror, fear, terror, disorientation. If we experience it completely, we experience the supreme joy, freedom, wisdom. It's a matter of experiencing this completely, not a matter of trying to take a shortcut. If you're trying to experience this completely, that's an attempt to take a shortcut. Rather than that, experience this completely. the time for us to share, have a conversation, discussion, about 20-25 minutes, so the time is yours. Yes.
If I think you said that the self is an illusion of some sort. If that were the case, then what is it that is reborn?
Yeah, I don't recall saying that the self is an illusion. Did I say that? Anyone else hear that? I don't recall saying that.
Perception.
What?
Perception in the thoughts.
Delusion.
Well, I said that the part of the world that we're most deluded about is what you could call oneself. That doesn't mean that the self is an illusion exactly. Does that make sense? We're just confused about it. Does that make sense? It's very common that someone else sees us more clearly than we do. Does that make sense? Have you never noticed that? Sometimes you're talking to someone and they actually know you better than you do.
Yes.
It happens.
Yes.
And it, I'd suggest it happens more than we notice. Because we're emotionally motivated to not notice. But I think it happens a lot. It's very common. I mentioned a certain religious doctrine in our society called materialism. There are others, of course. That's just one of the doctrines of the modern era. Another one is, there are different words for it, but you might call it humanism. And our version of humanism claims that you know who you are. You know yourself. Yes? So, in our version of things, what other people think of you doesn't really matter, right? You know what I'm saying? You're in elementary school and your friends are making fun of you and then you go and talk to the teacher or the guidance counselor or your parents and they say, well, only you know who you are. Yes, their opinion of you is irrelevant, you know? Well, this is just our culture's view of things. Most cultures would disagree with that, and I think those other cultures are quite intelligent in doing so. Because what other people think of you both matters practically. Your reputation has a large influence on your quality of life. And also, who are you to say? You know what I mean? Why are you the special person who gets to know you? You influence other people just as much, so they should also have the right to say who you are in their experience. So, none of that implies, though, that you don't really exist or something like that. Right? So the stuff in the basket, you can be deluded about it, but that doesn't mean that it's not there or something like that. Does that make sense? I'm not claiming there's no one there. But we can be deluded about what's there. Okay? So then the question then emerges, well then who is it? The question still is there, right? Who is it? Who is reborn? And this is a very significant question. We see this question come up in ancient India when the Buddha talked about rebirth. This is a very common question. We see this question come up again in ancient and medieval, and it continued to come up in medieval India, but we also see it in China as the teachings went to China. It's a very good question. People would write entire treatises on this question. And we see it again, of course we see it in many other cases that I'm not mentioning right now, but we see it again now. People will ask the question, okay, then who is reborn, right? And it's an interesting question. There are lots of answers through the centuries that I could bring up right now. I could talk about them quite a bit. Maybe I'll talk about one of them. But the most important thing to do when we ask that question, okay? The most important thing beyond the explanation, which if you want me to, I'll give, but I'll stop here You get to decide if you want me to give you one of the many brilliant answers that have been given over the centuries to this question. For now, in my experience as a teacher in this time, with this demographic, you know what I mean by this demographic? You know who you all are, right? You're a certain demographic. You're not everybody. Not everybody would come to something like this. You're a certain subset of our population. You're the type of person who would come to a meditation on Sunday evening. All of you are. Not everyone has done that, and there are certain personality characteristics that might make it more likely that you would. So for this demographic, the main thing I'd say is you should question the question. You should look for the assumptions that are required for that question to make sense. And that will probably be hard. Because it's the assumptions that you haven't noticed that are the important ones. There are certain assumptions that you're making, very significant assumptions that you're making. Okay, so if you say, who gets reborn? There are a lot of things you're assuming there. Does that make sense?
I'm not assuming that, but I understand the line of reasoning. I don't think that's exactly what I was thinking, but I understand the line of reasoning.
Well, you understand that you're making assumptions and formulating the question in that way?
Yes, but my question was more sort of to understand your thinking about this.
Well, my thinking is irrelevant. My thinking is the last thing you should be interested in. My thinking is worthless. The question is what's real. The question is what is the truth.
Right.
Trust me, when you get to the end, you're not going to be asking, I wonder what Soryu thinks about it. You're going to want to deal with the real issue. That is a real issue. So you should find out. Okay, I can be a tool that you use and then discard. All right? The things that come out of my mouth, you can take them on for a little while and then throw them away. But you should be asking the actual question. And I say this not to be critical, because obviously I love you very much, I come here often, but well, you know, families can friendly criticize. So it's something that I've brought up a lot recently, that it's hard to really question. It's hard to really investigate. It's easy to ask people their opinions, but that's not vulnerable. It doesn't make any difference. You know it doesn't make any difference what I or somebody else thinks. It's too easy. The question is, can you actually investigate? If you actually investigate, that's vulnerable. That's risky. You know it could destroy your life. Does that make sense? The way you live could radically change if you do that. Yikes. That's risky. And that's the most important thing, which a lot of us just aren't up for. And so I'm pushing you and all of us on this point that investigation is the most important thing. Examination is the most important thing. I can say this and that. I can tell you an interesting metaphor that people have given. I'm happy to do that if you want me to. I really am. I've got dozens of answers to this question. I can say them, I often do say them in my sleep. So it's easy for me, okay? And I'm happy to do it. Really, I can go on I can answer this question in extraordinary detail with logic. It would be completely logical. You may believe in logic, who knows? It would be completely reasonable. I can do that for the next 20 minutes. I can do that for the next 20 hours. I can do that for the next 20 days. I can do that for the next 20 years. I can answer this question for 20 years. No problem. Because I've asked it for more than 20 years. And I got to learn what a lot of people have said about it. But the only reason that would make any difference, the only reason that would be valuable, is if you're actually asking the question. I don't want to answer a question that you're not actually asking. Because somebody else here might have a question that they're actually asking. And I'd like to get to that one. So are you actually asking, or do you just want somebody's opinion?
am I actually asking?
Mm.
I think I'm more wanting your opinion on this.
Okay, so I'm happy to give you the teachings that have been given. Would you like that? Not really?
It's okay.
It's okay means I should or shouldn't tell you that?
No.
Don't tell you. Okay, great.
Can you tell the rest of us?
Sure. Sure. Happy to. I'll do it relatively quickly, just in a few minutes. As I say, we can go on and on about this. If you're very interested in this, now I'm talking to you, Jennifer, even though I have to look through a lot of different objects to get there. Hi. Hi. If you're very interested, then one way to answer the question, and in my opinion, the best way that's ever been given in all of human history, is called dependent arising, which is a Buddhist teaching. And it fully and completely answers this question in so much detail that most people never put in the time to understand it. It's very subtle and complex. And if you really want to know about it, then it'll take you, if you study it every day, 5 to 10 years to get a sense of what it's actually teaching. It's extremely complicated. It's usually given in a relatively simple form, which is 12 steps, and you kind of follow them. There are 12 components of this process, and you try to learn them a little bit. But to actually understand all the feedback loops, all of the loops and branches of this process, and how exactly they happen, and to understand the logic, how it makes sense, it's extremely difficult and requires you to, you can't do it with a modern mind. You have to give up Aristotelian thinking in order to understand it. It uproots basic components of the modern. You think it makes sense, and then you notice it doesn't make sense, and it's a terrible struggle to realize that it doesn't make sense because of the way you're looking at it. So you have to give up the way you're understanding it in order to understand it. So it's a huge process, and I'm not going to get into all of it now, but now you know what you can look up. Pratitya Samutpada is what it is in Sanskrit, and you can spend the next several years on that if you wish. I'd recommend it. It's fantastic. It's possibly the greatest achievement of human history, this discovery and its successful teaching. It'll be worth your time. But I can give you a very quick explanation right now, which was originally taught, to my knowledge, I don't know of anyone who taught it before her, recorded by the Theravadan canon, although other canons actually say a different nun taught this. But the Venerable Vajira was a nun at the time of the Buddha, and she was asked this question. This issue was brought up to her by Mara, who is this evil overlord of the universe, trying to trick her into no longer following the path. So he asked her, who is this being? Where did it come from? Where did she come from? Where is she going? And Venerable Vajira said, first of all, Mara, I know you. I see you. Don't think I don't know you. Don't think I don't see you, because I do. I know perfectly well that you're Mara. So Mara is this evil demon, he's very powerful. And who knows? I think for most of us, the best way we can understand Mara, in terms of an intelligence, is, and it's going to be maybe funny, and it's fine if you laugh, but don't be surprised if later you cry. The easiest way for you to understand what Mara is the financial system. Okay? Our culture has, our country, our world, has a financial system that runs the world. It runs everything. And it's above the economic system, which is above individual choices. It's this very high-level intelligence that is inherently bent on the production of death and suffering. It's just part of its nature. It's how it's set up. It's not neutral. Mara is the easiest way to understand the kind of intelligence that Mara is. So that kind of intelligence came to the nun, the bhikkhuni, the Venerable Vajira, and asked her those questions. Who is this being? Where has she come from? Where is she going? And the Venerable Vajira said, Mara, I know you. And then she said, why do you assume a being? Why do you assume being? Person. Why do you assume human being, woman? Somebody who was born, who then has to be the person who dies and is the person who gets reborn. Why do you assume that? This body is just a combination of parts. Like a cart, she said, or a chariot, or a car, like a car. A lot of us came here in cars. So, like a car, or a bicycle, or anything. A car is just a combination of parts. You put the wheels with the axles in a certain way, and you put the brakes in, and you put the body of the car and the windshield, and you put all those things together, and you get a car. Okay? If you claim there is no car, then you're stupid. Obviously there's a car. Look at it, it's there. You can drive it here. You can't say there's no car. Now, you can't say the car is an illusion. That's a weird thing to say. Why would you say that? It's a weird thing to say. It almost makes you think that the people who would say that are materialists who have taken the Buddhist doctrine and transformed it to fit their own ends. This claim that there is no one there. There's no person there. There is no being at all. Why would you say that? Yes? That's not what the Buddha taught. The Buddha never said there's no such thing as a self, you don't exist. That's an absurd thing to say. You understand? It's falsifiable immediately. In your direct experience right now, it's obvious that's not true. Okay. And yet he also didn't say there is someone there who's a permanent entity. In the same way that a car, it falls apart eventually, it only exists conditionally. Due to the putting together of parts, there is then a car. When those parts fall apart, there's no more car. The car arose and passed away according to conditions. Yes? And she said, a person, a being, is just like that. If you assume being, then the point is the assumption, the lack of investigation of what's actually happening there. Okay? So the process of cause and effect, of things arising according to conditions, things coming together, passing away when those conditions cease, then falling apart, that process is the process of rebirth. There doesn't need to be a being who's reborn. There doesn't need to be a lack of any being either. It's not about that. It's that there's a process. When this is, that arises. When this passes away, that passes away. That process, that direct experience of a process answers the question. But again, it can be a long investigation. And we have to be very careful about it falling into nihilism, which is to say there's no one there. Or, what shall we call it? What's the other thing? Existencism? What is it?
Existentialism?
Existentialism, kind of. It doesn't really get the point across. The realism, maybe? Reificationism? There's got to be a word for that, right?
Literalism?
What?
Literal?
Maybe literalism? Yeah, maybe literalism. Yeah. The sense of there is a substantial self-existent entity. Yes? So there is such a thing and there isn't anyone. Both of these you have to be very careful about, and this dependent arising, dependent co-arising, is the middle way between these two extremes. Does that help? Very good. We still have 5 minutes if there's anything else.
You said that you can't externalize
Mhm.
things.
Mhm.
Can you internalize them, like others?
That's a great question. No. No, you can't. You cannot externalize harm or benefit, and you also cannot internalize harm or benefit. Isn't that fun? Isn't that a relief? Is that nice? You don't have to do that. The experience of compassion is not the internalization of harm. We often think that that's what it is. We often think if I just suffer more, the world would be a better place. It doesn't work that way. That you have this suffering and I'll take it on for you doesn't work. Yes? To meet someone in their suffering isn't internalizing that suffering. It's simply dropping the distinction between inside and outside. It means that I'm no longer producing a wall so that I don't experience, so that I stop externalizing the harm, right? I stop preventing the natural state of compassion to unfold. I stop preventing that. Yes? So that the distinction between inside and outside is dropped. If there isn't the experience of inside and outside, then there cannot be the arising of the intention to externalize or internalize anything. Because the assumptional substrate, what would that be? The assumptional?
Assumptive?
Assumed, assumptive?
Ontology.
Yeah, your epistemic orientation.
Epistemic orientation. Your fundamental ontology that is the basis on which internalization, externalization as an intentional act happens. When that drops away, then those intentions don't arise. Does that make sense? If you don't experience inside versus outside, then the intention to internalize or externalize anything can't arise. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And mostly you're experiencing their boundaries or their creation of, other people's creation of the boundary. Which,
Whose?
like, there's like no boundaries for you, so.
Well, for who?
Right. Good point.
You're not going to experience their boundaries,
Right.
because if you do, then you're experiencing your boundaries.
Legit.
So it isn't experienced that way. It's just, I think the most important way to see this is that it doesn't have to be this way. You can do it without this happening if you want, but in my way of studying it, experiencing it, and teaching it, the easiest metric, the easiest measurement to determine whether you're really overcoming this internalization, externalization, willful act, okay, is compassion released? Meaning, is there more compassion now? Okay? So the experience of their boundaries is actually a hindrance to compassion. The experience of your boundaries is a hindrance to compassion. The experience of the difference between their boundaries and your boundaries, my boundaries, our boundaries, is a hindrance to compassion. When they drop away, you can confirm that you're moving along the specific thing that I'm saying, because compassion increases. You can measure that. Okay? Now, as I say, you can do this without that happening. Okay? If you want, you can move through this process of overcoming boundaries without compassion arising. You can do that. It's a valid path. I'm just saying the way I teach it, the way that you measure it is the increased sense of love that continually goes beyond your conceptual framework and forces you out of it, forces you to transcend it, because you directly realized a love that didn't need it. So you can follow the love rather than that conceptual framework. And then live. I mean, you do. You live. You continue to be in the world, living, doing things. It's amazing. You can't not. Exactly. Right. All right, are we there? I think we're there, yes.